So Rohini is from IIT Madras, and she's a board member of NEA Portfolio Companies. She's a former partner of venture capital firm NEA, where she led investments in enterprise and consumer companies. Over the 7 years that she has worked in NEA, she has led dozens of startup financing, and she has sat on 13 boards and was an active company builder and achieved successful exits for many of them. She is also the founder and CEO of Ink's Edge, which is an event communication company targeting the Indian market, which she incubated at NEA. And giving you a little bit of history about her lineage of education, she received an MBA from MIT, Sloan School of Management, and she has an MS from Case Western and also BTech from IIT Madras. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rohini, and then she will go ahead and get this kicked off. Thank you.
So I'm really excited to be moderating this panel on career inflections. And as we know, the conference today is themed from engineers to leaders. And so, as the saying goes, first do your engineering and then you figure out what you want to be in life. And, and so we have all kind of followed some version of that path. And I think my esteemed panel here has, they've been really imaginative and risk-taking in their approach to their own career planning and so on. What I'll do today is we'll have everybody introduce themselves, maybe take a minute just so they can tell you in their own words, a brief bio on each of their journeys. And then we'll have a conversation about career inflections, what people are going through, and so on. If I can have a show of hands on, how many of you are early in your careers, within 10 years of undergrad? Okay, fair number of people. And how many of you are thinking about a career inflection? So thinking of sort of either a different job in a new industry or the same industry. Okay, great. So I think we'll kind of use that as the basis for our conversation today. Preet, if you want to just get started with some intros, that'd be great.
So I'm Preet Banerjee, BTech IIT Kharagpur. Did my master's PhD from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And my first 20 years, I was in academia. I was a professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Northwestern. I was a dean of engineering at Illinois, Chicago. Then I was involved with two very small software startups, Excelchip and Banachip, which literally changed my career. This is where I started to kind of like to build products and so on. Then I transitioned to the corporate world about 10 years ago, came to the Bay Area to head up HP Labs worldwide for about 5 years, then was CTO at ABB. I was in Zurich in Switzerland, then at global head of R&D at Accenture, and CTO at Schneider Electric. Just this week, I did one more career inflection to become a senior client partner at Korn Ferry, which is an executive search firm, but I have joined their consulting practice.
Thank you. Manish?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and it's a great honor to be on this panel. A quick bio about myself. So I graduated from IIT Kharagpur in 1996. I majored in agricultural engineering and came to the US right after to get my master's at UC Davis, about 100 miles from here. After my master's, I had my first inflection point. If you look at my career from in a career inflection point lens, that was the first inflection point. And like many of my friends and peers, I jumped headlong into the technology revolution that was going on in the Silicon Valley. So I was fortunate enough to join Oracle Corporation as a software developer. Did that for about 8 years. I was head of engineering for a product at Oracle. That's when the second inflection point started, where I signed up for the Wharton School's executive MBA here available in San Francisco. And 6 months into the program, I realized there's so much more outside of engineering. So gave up my leadership position in engineering and joined as an individual contributor in a product marketing organization. Did that for 4 years, was running that group at the end of 4 years, jumped a couple companies, and then finally ended up with AppDynamics about 3 years ago as a head of product marketing. A year into the AppDynamics gig, I was offered the opportunity to be the chief of staff to the CEO. So this was the second inflection point. So from engineering to marketing, and then that took me into business operations. So I've been doing that for the past 2 years, and very excited to share my perspective on my journey.
Thanks, Manish. Abir, let's go straight down the line.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Abir Dubey. I graduated from IIT Delhi in 2002. And straight after college, I actually pursued like a very common path to go for advanced degree. I spent a year in Switzerland, where at the time I was thinking about a career in academia, maybe pursuing a PhD. And very soon, within a year, I realized that's not the path that's probably well suited for me. And that's when kind of made the first inflection. I realized I wanted to sort of be in a space where I can apply some of the analytical and quantitative skills in a business setting. So that's around the time I kind of came to the US for my master's here at Stanford. And when you are typically pursuing this, the usual things people will tell you is maybe finance is the field where typically you will go. So I actually did a couple of stints at a private equity shop, in a fixed income shop. And after graduation, was kind of looking at, hey, what is it that I could pursue? And had a fairly open lens with that broad definition. That's when Google came knocking at the door, and he said, hey, we are building this new team in HR, and we are looking for some quantitative skill sets for that team. And I literally had to ask them twice, are you sure you need an engineer in HR? And said, yeah, it's a kind of a unique team. You know, we're trying to sort of bring, just like we have rigorous process of looking at our products, our revenue, our finances, we want to have a similarly rigorous process for thinking about people issues, thinking about hiring, thinking about sort of building best managers, best teams. And I was just fascinated. And I basically took a 3-month internship just to explore what this field even means. And 11 and a half years later, I'm still sort of, continue to be fascinated by the space and what we can do in this area. So really happy to be here, happy to share more. On the personal side, we just had me and my wife just had a personal inflection point. We have an 8-month-old daughter, so that's what I'm kind of learning a lot on the personal side. But really happy to be here and discuss this with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Abir. Mangesh, do you want to round out the panel?
Sure. Yeah, so Mangesh Pimpalkare, I'm really happy to be here. So it's a great opportunity to be with all ex-alum and all of you, who have been to IITs much more recently. And like many of the people here, I started my journey in engineering with an electrical engineering degree from IIT Bombay, and then following that up with a master's in electrical and computer engineering from Virginia Tech. And I thought I would probably be an engineer for a long time to come, right? So my first 8 years were at companies like Intel, and then a small company called NeoMagic, which was here in the Valley. It turned out to be one of the faster growing chip companies in the Valley. And after doing that for 8 years, I surprised myself by saying I want to actually do something else. Went off to business school, and then made the transition to venture capital. So I spent the next 8 years in a venture fund, becoming an investor. And then in 2008, actually, things came full circle. I came back to the industry, and I've been in a bunch of software companies since then. And I'm back at a young emerging company right now, where I'm heading up product management.
Excellent. Thank you. Maybe, Mangesh, if we can stay with you and just start out with, as people plan out their careers, obviously, looking to broaden out from engineering, product roles are usually the first place people think about to say, okay, why are we building, what are we building, and when does it need to happen? Sort of thinking about more of the product rather than the core technology. Since you've spent some time now in product roles, maybe we can start with you and just talk about what's the difference between doing an engineering role versus transitioning to a product role. How have you thought about it? What works and what doesn't for people who are taking that as the next step in their career?
Sure. So having done this for the last several years, building products, whether it's product marketing or product management, is really, in my view, the culmination of many different things. And this is one of those roles where people come from many different backgrounds. I mean, I've seen world-class product managers who are completely non-technical. I've seen people at the opposite end of the spectrum where they're great technologists before they transition into building products. And the reason is that there's no one magic formula for becoming a great product person. And what you need is a few core elements, right? No matter whether you've sequenced them in one way or another. The one at the top is really a obsessive empathizing with the customer, right? And this is something, you may have an innate understanding of that as you start your career. In some other cases, you may develop that as you kind of come up through the ranks, whatever your function is, whether it's engineering, whether it's customer success, whether it's sales engineering. People have so many different backgrounds as they become world-class product people that there's no real one known path for success. So I would say developing that understanding of the customer is probably the common thread on how you become successful as a product manager.
Manish, do you want to just add to that, since you've kind of maybe gone through the engineering leadership path and been, and product management was probably your customer during that journey, and then you switched to the other side where product was your main role. Kind of how do you think about those two different roles, and is that something, what should people who are considering broadening out from engineering and going into product know about themselves or know about the role?
Right. So my path was slightly different because the way product marketing function was structured within Oracle, it was more sales-centric. So product marketing is a function that could either be very close to engineering or it could be very close to sales. And at Oracle, product management is very close to sales, product or engineering. And product marketing was closer to sales, which is what I was looking for. I wanted to kind of get out of the engineering building and really get out there, speak to customers, understand their pain points. Again, it's at the end of the day, I completely agree with Mangesh, it's all about the customer. So I learned to, from engineering, either you fix a bug, either you lose a message or you don't lose a message. There's no, it's completely black and white, right? Either your server crashes in certain conditions or it doesn't crash. In product marketing, it's about really understanding what the customer is looking for, empathizing with their pain, making a case and creating an urgency inside them so that they buy your product. And as part of that, I think some of the key skills would be to learn to communicate, learn to communicate through pictures, tell stories. When you tell stories, they tend to stick. If you throw data at them, they don't quite remember. The other thing is there's something called micro expressions that I encourage everyone to go look at. This is a science of reading people's micro expressions and really understanding where they stand. That becomes invaluable when you're talking to a customer, because the customer might be saying something, but their body language might be telling you another story. So there's all these different skills that you develop when you put yourself out there. It's more about understanding people, understanding technologies, and telling stories that resonate with the audience.
Interesting, thanks. I think, I was reading this book called The Startup of You by Reid Hoffman, which is an excellent book. Sort of thinking about planning your career and so on. And one of the things he talks about is to really think of your career as a set of tours of duty, right? It's not the old form of planning your career where you stayed in one place and you moved with one organization. It's pretty much gone, and you really need to think of things as tours of duty. And when I talked to Preet, I really felt like that's kind of how he has thought about his career also. So he has spent, actually 12 years in academia, and then tried something else, and then gone back to academia, decided that that's not what he wanted to do at that point. Maybe you want to kind of elaborate on your journey, and is the tour of duty a good model for how you've thought about your career planning?
So Rohini and I kind of got together last week to say how I position this, and there's something that I want to share with you. As people make career choices, think of it as a three-dimensional vector. you can work for a company, like say App Dynamics, right? And within the same company, same industry, you can change your role. So you are an engineer and you became a product manager, or you went into sales. That is the X dimension. So in the same company, same industry, you change your role, which is a good thing to do periodically, because otherwise you get just doing the same boring thing. You really cannot contribute to society as much. Second thing is, you take the same role, you are a CTO of one company, you become a CTO of another company in the same industry. For example, I was CTO at ABB, then I became CTO at Schneider. Similar things, et cetera. My role was the same, et cetera. It was just a different company. New people, new culture, but it's the same role, right? But then you have a sort of a third dimension, which is a completely different industry. Like I was in academia, then I came to Hewlett-Packard in the computer industry, right? And it was a different company, different role, different industries. Talk about an ultimate reset. It's like that in the XYZ space is that maximum thing, right? Those are the hardest. And what people in the executive search world say is that 1 change is hard, 2 is risky, 3 is like, boy, you are really taking a big chance. But I also think that it's these really risky things are the tremendous opportunities for personal development and real contribution. And to show a case in point, look at IBM. IBM was struggling many, many years ago, and they brought in Lou Gerstner from a tobacco industry, right? And people say, what? I mean, why do you bring this guy? And Lou Gerstner completely changed IBM in the way they did things, right? And there are lots and lots of such examples that you can also think about. So sometimes it is a good idea, but it is actually hard. But I just wanted to share that with all of you.
So was that your personal experience?
That was my personal experience. Is, I will tell you, when I moved from academia to Hewlett-Packard, those of you who know academia, right? I was a tenured full professor. I was a dean, right? It is the ultimate permanence in job. I left it all to come to the Bay Area, Hewlett-Packard, et cetera, and I didn't know what, and everybody told me, Prit, just don't do this. You are making a big mistake. But boy, was I happy. I know I have a former colleague at HP Labs here, Partha, somewhere in the audience. It was the most funnest time I had. There are things I brought in from the academic world, right? HP Labs had a bunch of like 6 previous HP Labs directors. They did it one way, and they were all former HP Labs people. I was the only one from the outside. I think I brought in some new things to the HP Labs organization. I personally learned a lot, and I think the organization also did. So it was a good 3-dimensional change, but it was very, very risky. I could have lost it all, and then my wife would have said, why did you give up tenure?
Well, glad it worked out. So Abir, I think maybe you can expand on that point a little bit, right? Which is, we all come with a set of assets to begin with, maybe critical thinking skills and some quantitative skills and so on. And as we grow through our careers, we start building other types of skills. And you see it from the aspect of, you have the data at Google to see kind of how people plan their careers, what do they do, and what works and what doesn't. And in particular, Abir led a project within Google called Project Aristotle on how high-functioning teams work, and it's a well-published study, pretty well known. And I'd love to kind of have you share some of those learnings with the audience, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me kind of like break that down into sort of 3 pieces. One, sort of my own experience making that inflection, what I've observed, having been in the unique vantage of looking at people navigating their career in a company like Google, and then sort of specific project on the team stuff. So on the personal side, I think as engineers, we all kind of, through our training get really good at sort of solving deterministic problems. Like we know sort of, how to get to sort of the answer to this very, very tough problems. When I sort of transitioned to sort of applying that lens on the people space, I think that was one of the sort of biggest challenge was people are unpredictable. Like the same person could have a very different reaction to the same thing in a different time. And sort of trying to model that aspect is just a very fascinating mathematical problem. So even from the perspective of just, that fuzziness of how you think about human behavior in a quantitative fashion was extremely fascinating. So that was one aspect I think that drew to me. The second was, kind of being an engineer, sort of being introvert by myself, I always used to get fascinated by folks who have just amazing charismatic presentation skills, people skills, who can just kind of make that connection, because I just never had that sort of training or a building of that muscle. So surrounding you with folks, and especially like in a field like HR, you just get to meet a lot of folks who have just this exceptional sort of understanding of human emotions, sort of empathy, how to kind of customize your message for the audience. And that for me was like a huge learning experience, like a big challenge. But like, as I said, once you make those inflection points, it comes with challenge, but then also a lot of learnings, which I have really, really enjoyed. In terms of sort of broader lens, if I look at sort of Google and how career inflection goes, my general thinking is people who do this really well actually do put in a lot of thought and planning, and you have to really sometimes kind of play a slightly longer game to be able to do that effectively, right? I had a person on my team, this woman who was trained in communications in college and aspired to be a software engineer. This was like a 6-year journey for her. She sort of moved from communication role to analyst role. Analyst was like more technical role, then worked closely with the product folks. And literally sort of a couple of weeks ago, she sent me a note, which is now like a poster child of career development for me, where the people really sort of put in effort. Other thing that I've realized is, sometime when you think of certain career choice, we sometimes have preconceived notion of, hey, I need to have a CS degree to do that, or I need to have, and that's, in most of the cases, that's just not true. I think there might be like majority of folks who may have pursued a certain path, but there are always people who kind of, through like rigorous planning, have made a ton of big changes and big successful changes, which I see at Google. Right? I keep sharing the story. Sort of Google is infamous for we only hire people who have just degrees from large schools, high GPA, which I think especially typically was the brand of the company at least a decade ago, and we are slowly sort of trying to move away from that. But we have engineers who don't even have like an undergraduate degree who are leading large teams, like Chrome was built by someone who didn't go to college ever. So I think that's part of, if you deliberately plan for it, everything is possible, and data sort of shows that. Like, don't have any preconceived notion is the other thing. And then kind of like slight segue just to kind of cover the third point, which Rohini was mentioning, I think other thing that you really learn by kind of looking at the people data, one of the projects we did was sort of what makes effective teams. And one of the most fascinating findings that we had from this, we actually looked at about 250 odd teams across Google. We collected 200 plus variables about the teams and to figure out what is it that they're doing that is better than the other. And the single most fascinating aspect was it was not about who is on the team, it was like how the team functions. So it's kind of like having a much better understanding of those cultural nuances, sort of interpersonal skills, kind of having this notion of what we call psychological safety turned out to be like the biggest factor. So these are things which I think a really good mix of bringing the best of social science and like the engineering science, which we have been able to uncover.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, and it actually brings up the other point, which is, again, sorry to go back to the same book, but Reid Hoffman in his book talks about having assets, aspirations, and market reality. So sort of really kind of taking stock of your own career situation, and as you're thinking about doing different things, to say, okay, you have the assets which are typically your knowledge and your your experience, and maybe even kind of your hard assets. Maybe you've made some money at a company and you want to do something completely different. It lets you do other things. Your aspirations, which is mostly introspection on kind of finding out what you want to do and so on. And then the market reality of, okay, what is needed? Are your assets valuable or not? Has the market changed, right? You may have trained as a semiconductor engineer and maybe that wasn't as valuable. Or in Mangesh, you commented about 2008, where there were market disruptions which made you rethink your career inflection points. I think really having that introspection, but also trying things out and matching that with what the market demands would be a useful way to plan your career. Preet, I think you had some comments on the chip world and going and doing something new in the energy space.
Absolutely, and so actually want to make 2 points here. One is how large organizations, I actually saw both ABB and Schneider take this career inflection as a way to build up a person's career, like what Abir was mentioning, in a very methodical way. I mean, these companies are large multinational companies, but in Schneider Electric, the top leaders are all sort of rotated among roles, right? So today you are VP of R&D or engineering. By design, they'll put you in a strategy role. Then they put in an operational role in Nigeria. I mean, and so essentially in our XCOM executive committee meeting, right, a 4-hour meeting, 2 hours in every XCOM meeting was dedicated to people and who is moving where, right? And essentially it is literally by design how they orchestrate this thing. You think, hey, and in a company like Schneider or ABB, the call comes from a CEO, you now move to Nigeria, you just take that job because there is a big sort of plan ahead about those things. So that's one thing I just wanted to make sure. The other thing is, for this audience, I wanted to share something that it's a lot easier to, if you are doing sort of EDA, right? I'm doing coding on EDA, I know this placement algorithm very well, et cetera, et cetera. It's very comfortable and cozy to say in that same space because you know that space. But sometimes, I mean, like what has happened in the EDA space, there used to be lots of EDA startups in the 1990s and so on, and Rohini, as an investor, she knows this. I did an EDA startup. Now, if you are doing EDA, bad thing, right? But the same technologies apply to the new hot buzzwords like AI and machine learning and so on. So my point is, you should be willing, when that market reality hits, say, you know what, I may know about EDA, I know all this thing, but it's time for me to just do a reset and move into a different industry. That's kind of what happened when I moved from HP, where the computer industry was having its sort of flattening out. I wouldn't say going down, but it's flattening down. And I saw tremendous opportunity in the energy industry, right? And everybody's talking about renewable energy, this, that, et cetera, et cetera. And that was I knew nothing about energy, right? And here I went from head of HP Labs to CTO of ABB. Another sort of thing where I said, oh my God, should I do it? But the market reality, what she talked about, was the thing that made me do this. So I just encourage all of you who are young and so on to just get out of your comfort level and say, you know what? I'm going to try that because that's where I see the opportunities are. On the other hand, you should not keep flipping. I mean, in a way, I criticize myself by perhaps I've flipped a little too frequently, but every 5 years, it's a great idea. 2-3 years is, I think, too soon because you don't develop the deep industry insights or whatever that you need in your job. So I just wanted to share those 2 points with you.
Thank you, Preet. Mangesh, do you want to add to that? I think you had the 2008 experience.
Yeah, sure. And actually, the model that you just said, right, resonates because inflection points can be driven by a variety of factors. And as you said, it could be something that's internal. I mean, I've really had 2 major inflection points in my career. The first one, as I said earlier, when I moved from engineering more to getting involved with business and then making the transition to venture capital, that was very much aspirational, right? And that was something I wanted to do. There was tremendous learning in the process, and that stretched me. I mean, it made me go from a technical person more to realizing the people side of the business. And the second one, from getting out of venture back to the industry, was very different. So all of you, some of you at least, will remember 2008 and how there was a big disruption in the market. And once that kind of external disruption happens, everyone may not actually have the perfect set of choices. And so, when I was faced by a suboptimal market, instead of waiting around, I actually proactively chose to jump back into the industry. And what you can do in those kind of circumstances, whether it's driven by an internal factor or an external factor, it's pretty important to maintain that North Star, your own North Star, right? Why are you going through these inflection points, and what's the common thread through all of these? So in my case, it was a passion for products and technology. So I did have several transitions back to Preet's analogy of kind of a 3-dimensional space. There were changes in function. I moved from engineering to product to professional services, back to product and general management. There were transitions in industry or domain. I moved from hardware to systems to software, software as a service. And there were transitions from big companies to small companies, both as an investor as well as being back in operating roles. But the common thread that I had hasn't really changed. It's to be involved with products. It's to be involved at the cutting edge of technology and really, try and spot the waves where it's going to be most energizing for me to get up in the morning and then to inspire other people around me. So find your North Star, right? That's the bottom line. If you find the North Star, then all these changes are eventually going to be a net positive.
Thanks, Mangesh. I think that's amazing self-awareness, by the way, and a great way to plan, to handle things that come at you, which is an important skill as well. We'll open it up for questions at this point. I have one question sort of on people and how do you use your network and mentors. We'll have that question, but if other people have questions, please come to the mic and we can take them as well. Manish, while we wait for people to come to the mic, you had mentioned that early in your career you had a professor who said, hey, maybe you should go into software. You have a talent for this. Just comment on sort of people who have molded your career inflections, and has that happened later as well in your career?
Absolutely. So that was an interesting story. At UC Davis, when I came to do my graduate program, in the first quarter, my professor asked me that, why don't you look at these 5 courses? And I signed up for all 5. And typically, students will take 2 or maximum 3 courses. That was a really rough quarter. But then I had so much free time later. That's when I took some software engineering courses, computer networks, and that's how I got exposed. And the professor recommended me. That's how I really landed with the first software developer gig. In terms of network, I have my go-to friends when it comes to, I can't keep up with all the latest technology developments, so I have my go-to friends whom I call and I ask them, hey, what do you think about this technology? How would this translate into a business problem we are looking at? Or I have my mentors who have been, very senior people at Oracle who are my management up the chain. I reach out to them, I ask them questions. But as part of the process, you can't just be taking, you got to nourish your network as well. So you got to give back. When you find an article that's interesting that your colleague or your friend might find interesting, take those 2 seconds to forward that link and saying, hey, I thought of you, this might be interesting for you. Or I'm very open on LinkedIn. People reach out to me. I connect people. I get great pleasure in helping people. So that's my way of giving back. And if this is the most powerful room in terms of network that can be out there in the world. And I've always urged my Kharagpur batchmates to give back, and we all should make a commitment to give back to the IIT community and the broader community in general.
Thanks, Manish.
Yeah.
We'll take a question. If you want to just say your name and who the question's for, that'd be great.
I'm Kishan. I'm from IIT Roorkee, 2013 batch. So my question is generally for the panel members. I mean, anyone can answer that. The millennials recently, they make a lot of career changes. I mean, they switch jobs quite often, more than the 90s. I mean, either for climbing up the hierarchy quicker or for a career change. And I've also seen many successful people who have stayed in the same company for more than 15, 20 years and becoming the CEO of those companies. And there is also a viewpoint nowadays that if you stay with the same company for more than 5 years, the industry kind of looks like, the industry looks at you like you're not ready for challenges. So how do you see this? I mean, at one end, there are many successful people who stay in the same company and they achieve a lot of different things. And this kind of millennial mindset and this industry's new kind of viewpoint, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, thanks, Kishan. Manish, you want to go?
Sure. So in general, there's no formula for success, right? People find their own path towards success. Now, I'll do contrast and compare for the 2 scenarios that he outlined, right? On one hand, if you are in a large company and if you are really doing meaningful projects that are moving the needle and you're growing, there's no reason for you to look outside. If the corporation is investing in you, in your growth, no reason to look outside. If that's not happening, if you feel like you have more potential, you have other talents that you should tap into, you should look for a functional change within the company or look outside. In terms of changing rapidly for title growth, I'm not a believer of that. At the end of the day, you have to develop skills that are invaluable. even when you're moving from one function to another, always think, what is that unique skill set that's going to be a differentiator in that new role? So when I went from engineering to product marketing, most product marketers were not as deeply technical as me. So that gave me an opportunity to talk to the architects. I could hang with the architects in terms of conversations, as well as the CIOs. Because of my MBA, I could have those conversations as well. So always think, have a fair assessment of your skill set, and figure out what are your strengths and how you're going to leverage them when you're changing careers. You have to have an anchor to build around.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think what Manish said is very true. It's it's not a magic formula, right? How quickly to change. There's no doubt that the pace of change in value creation in the industry, how quickly companies who are at the top, and 10 years later, whether they get swapped out or they last at the top, that has changed. I mean, we recently did an analysis where if you looked at the most valuable companies pre-year 2000, their average time to get to be those companies was more than 75 years, right? If you do the same rerun right now, I mean, you just have to look at Facebook, but there's plenty of other examples. Facebook, more than $400 billion of market cap in just 13 years, right? So the pace has changed, and that's going to drive how fast people have to change. So I think the key point is, whether you do it at your company or whether you change functions, do it at another company, there's absolutely no doubt that you as a person have to evolve. I mean, you have to relearn every single dimension of how you're going to build yourself every couple of years, right? If you don't do that, then you're going to stagnate personally.
Thank you. We'll take one last question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Amit from IIT Bombay. So regarding Prit's point about making a multidimensional change maybe every 5 years, yes, I agree with that statement. But then how do you actually accomplish that, considering that most employers want to hire only experts?
That's a great question. So the easiest thing to do is try to look for a new role in your own organization. And this is kind of what Manish said. So you work, say, within Oracle, right? And it's very comfortable to do the same engineering thing for the same product in Oracle, and you can just be the total expert in that product, but you will not have personal satisfaction or personal growth. So to do that, what you have to do is to talk to your manager, say, you know what, I really want to do marketing, I want to do sales or whatever, right? And see if that organization is willing to invest in you, because when you're doing that switch, right, for the first 6 months, you will not give back to the organization. They will be training you, investing, you will learn sales, etc. See if the organization is willing to invest in you or not. If not, then you do the reset button, leave Oracle, go to SAP, I'm just saying, right? So that's when you say, well, the organization really doesn't sort of care about my personal growth, because I think every 5 years you should change, right? So at that point, then you say, okay, I go from, say, Oracle to SAP. You have made a company change, keep the same role, but at least the organization is different, because you may think, growing up within Oracle, that this is the way software engineering is done. You go to a different company, oh my God, how different it is. Like literally when I went from ABB to Schneider, I found. So just a change in a company, you will learn a lot personally and really evolve yourself. And then the third thing is, of course, as I think Manish said, you need to be aware of how the market is adjusting around you, right? If you are within a company like Schneider and you're doing this sort of breakers and panels and transformers and so on, and the world is moving towards IoT, connectivity, big data software. If I am a Schneider engineer, I better sort of complement my skills to prepare myself for the new digital world, right? So you are doing it on your own. Your manager didn't tell you, you have to do it on your own in terms of learning skills, so that when that new job opens up in Schneider Electric on a IoT platform work, you will be tapped for that job. So it's actually, you can actually really plan your career. The easiest thing to do is to plateau, right? You're really happy in your job, you're going down, whatever, Redwood City, and working on that thing. After 5 years, just think like you lost your job, you lost your tenure. What am I going to do next? That is a fantastic thing. It is really energizing to you, and you will contribute back to the company.
That's interesting. Abir, do you want to add to that? You know, Google famously had the 20% time for a
Yeah, I
long
think
time to explore.
I would just kind of expand. I think I typically agree. I think a couple of things that I say, that if you have a very specific sort of North Star, I think they need to have the appropriate like time horizon, right? Sometimes you may not be able to make that huge jump in one step. You need to kind of think, okay, I'm going to do it in 3 steps, and this is my first step, which kind of takes me there. So that's usually like I think typically the thing. One of the other things as people sort of navigate, okay, what should be the inflection point that I pursue? One of the advices I got from a leader I admire a lot at Google, which resonated with me a lot, is basically, you know, this kind of goes back to understanding the norms in the business. Is basically there's several things you can choose. Maybe first prioritize the industry. Just know where the industry is going. If that's sort of, you know, if in the right space, in generally you'll be fine. Then kind of look at the function. Like I want to be a product manager, I want a sales guy, and then kind of go into the specific role. Sometimes people kind of do it inverse. Like I just want to be an analyst wherever I can be. And you may end up in an industry which no matter how well you do, if the industry is going down, like it's not going to lead to a good career. So that's something that I always share with people, sort of roughly sort of follow that.
Find the rocket ship, yeah. That's it. Well, thank you so much, Mangesh Pimplekhare, Abir Dubey, Manish Joshi, and Preet Banerjee. I think that was a really interesting conversation on your personal journeys and also your insights into how to think about career inflections. If it's okay, I'll offer that you'll stay for a few minutes for people to come and talk to you after the panel. And I hope you all have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.